What really happens inside your body when dangerous visceral fat finally begins to break down? Not the fat you can pinch under your skin, but the deep, hidden fat wrapped around your organs that silently increases your risk of heart attack, diabetes, and stroke. In this video, you are going to see step-by-step what science is revealing about the exact moment your visceral fat starts to decompose, where it goes, how your body uses it, and what powerful changes it triggers in your metabolism, your hormones, and even your energy and mood. Most people think that losing belly fat is just about watching the scale go down, but that is not true. Weight loss can include water, muscle, and different types of fat. Visceral fat is the most dangerous type, and when it finally starts to break down, your body reacts in a completely different way compared to normal, superficial fat loss. In this video, you will discover how visceral fat releases fatty acids and inflammatory substances, how your liver and muscles handle this flood of energy, and why certain people feel more focused, lighter, and healthier when this fat begins to disappear. Stay very attentive because you will also see why the process is not linear, why some people hit plateaus, and why the wrong strategy can cause your body to defend visceral fat instead of burning it. If you are tired of generic tips and want a science-based explanation of what is really happening inside your body, this video was made for you. Before moving on, comment below if you are enjoying this video so far and tell from which country or city you are watching. And stay with this video until the very end, because the final part will show how to support this process in a safe and intelligent way. Remember, if you plan to apply any strategy to reduce visceral fat, always do it under the supervision of a licensed medical professional. To understand what happens when visceral fat begins to decompose, it is essential to understand what visceral fat actually is. Visceral fat is the fat stored deep inside your abdominal cavity, surrounding organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which sits directly under your skin and is often visible as belly fat, visceral fat can accumulate quietly without being obvious in the mirror. That is why someone can look only slightly overweight but still carry a dangerous amount of hidden fat on the inside. Visceral fat behaves like a highly active organ. It does not simply sit there passively. It constantly releases hormones, inflammatory substances, and fatty acids into your bloodstream. These signals interfere with insulin, increase inflammation, and disturb normal metabolic function. As a result, high levels of visceral fat are strongly linked to insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, abnormal cholesterol levels, fatty liver, and an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. In many cases, visceral fat is a central piece of the metabolic syndrome puzzle. When visceral fat finally starts to break down, you are not just changing your appearance, you are changing your internal biochemistry. The fat cells in this region begin to shrink as they release stored triglycerides, which are then converted into free fatty acids and glycerol. These molecules enter the bloodstream and can be used as fuel by muscles, the heart, and other tissues, or processed by the liver. As the total amount of visceral fat decreases, the constant toxic drip of inflammatory chemicals and excess fatty acids is reduced. This drop can gradually lower systemic inflammation and improve how your cells respond to insulin. Another important point is that visceral fat is more metabolically active and more responsive to hormonal changes than many other fat depots. That means it can be lost relatively faster when the right conditions are in place, such as improved insulin sensitivity, a caloric deficit, increased physical activity, and strategic fasting or meal timing for those who are medically cleared. As these conditions drive the breakdown of visceral fat, health markers tend to improve. Waist circumference shrinks, blood sugar control can get better, blood pressure may decrease, and liver fat often reduces. In simple terms, when visceral fat finally begins to decompose, your body stops living under constant internal attack and starts moving back toward balance. That is why doctors and researchers are so focused on reducing this specific type of fat. If you want more science-based explanations like this on a regular basis, consider subscribing to the channel in a discreet way now, so you do not miss the next videos on visceral fat, hormones, and long-term metabolic health. When visceral fat starts to decompose, the process is not random. It follows a clear biochemical pathway inside your fat cells, also known as adipocytes. The process begins when your body senses an increased demand for energy and a signal to release stored fuel. This usually happens when insulin levels drop and counter-regulatory hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and glucagon rise. These hormones activate enzymes inside fat cells that trigger a process called lipolysis, the breakdown of stored triglycerides. Triglycerides are the main form of stored fat in your adipocytes. Each triglyceride molecule is made of 3 fatty acid chains attached to a glycerol backbone. During lipolysis, enzymes such as hormone-sensitive lipase and adipose triglyceride lipase progressively cut these molecules apart. This reaction releases free fatty acids and glycerol into the cytoplasm of the fat cell. From there, they are transported into the bloodstream, often bound to a carrier protein called albumin and delivered to tissues that can use them for energy. Once these free fatty acids reach cells like muscle fibers or heart cells, they are taken up and moved into mitochondria, the power plants of the cell. Inside the mitochondria, the fatty acids undergo beta oxidation, a series of chemical steps that gradually chop them into smaller units. These units feed into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, where they are converted into usable energy in the form of ATP, along with water and carbon dioxide. The glycerol component can travel to the liver and be used to make glucose or enter other metabolic pathways, depending on the body's needs. As lipolysis continues and more triglycerides are broken down, the visceral fat cells become smaller. They do not disappear completely, but their volume reduces and their secretory profile can change. Smaller, healthier fat cells release fewer inflammatory cytokines and may respond better to insulin. Over time, this contributes to improved insulin sensitivity, more stable blood sugar levels, and a reduced inflammatory burden throughout the body. This is one reason why people often notice more than just visual changes when visceral fat drops. They may experience clearer thinking, more stable energy, less joint pain, and better blood test results. However, this process has to remain balanced. If too many fatty acids are released too quickly and the body cannot use or store them safely, they can accumulate in places where they do not belong, such as in the liver or inside muscle cells. This ectopic fat deposition can worsen insulin resistance if the overall lifestyle is not aligned with healthy eating, movement, and recovery. That is why the best approach to decomposing visceral fat includes both stimulating lipolysis and ensuring that the rest of your metabolism is prepared to handle and burn the released fat efficiently. When visceral fat finally begins to break down, your organs do not stay passive. They react dynamically to the new flow of energy and signals in the bloodstream. One of the first organs to feel the impact is the liver, because a large portion of visceral fat drains directly into the portal circulation, the network of veins that delivers blood from your digestive organs to the liver. When visceral fat releases fatty acids and inflammatory molecules, those substances travel quickly to the liver and can either help or harm, depending on the overall metabolic state. If visceral fat is breaking down gradually in the context of better diet, improved insulin sensitivity, and increased physical activity, the liver can use many of those fatty acids as fuel or convert them into ketone bodies. Ketones can be used by the brain, muscles, and other tissues as an efficient energy source, especially when carbohydrate intake is lower. As liver fat decreases and inflammation drops, markers such as ALT, AST, and GGT may improve, and the risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease can decline. In this scenario, the liver transitions from a stressed, overloaded organ to a more efficient metabolic hub. Your muscles also respond to the new energy environment. When visceral fat decomposes and releases fatty acids, active muscles can capture and burn them, particularly during low to moderate intensity movement like walking, cycling, or light resistance training. Over time, if you combine visceral fat reduction with strength training, your muscles can become more insulin sensitive, meaning they store more glycogen and pull more glucose out of the blood after meals. This synergy between reduced visceral fat and stronger, more insulin-sensitive muscles is one of the most powerful combinations for long-term metabolic health. The heart benefits as well. Visceral fat is closely associated with higher blood pressure, arterial stiffness, and a more inflammatory blood environment. When visceral fat levels drop, blood pressure often trends downward, blood vessel function improves, and the overall workload on the heart can decrease. Cholesterol patterns may also shift toward a healthier profile, with lower triglycerides and improved HDL to triglyceride ratios. Although results vary between individuals, the general direction is that less visceral fat usually means a lower cardiovascular risk. Hormones are deeply involved in these changes. As visceral fat decreases, the chronic overload of inflammatory signals that disrupt hormones like leptin, insulin, cortisol, and adiponectin becomes weaker. Leptin, which helps regulate hunger and energy balance, may start to signal more accurately, making it easier to feel satisfied with appropriate portions. Insulin can work more effectively, allowing your body to move sugar into cells without needing extremely high amounts of the hormone. Cortisol, the stress hormone, may also stabilize over time as metabolic and inflammatory stress decline. Altogether, the breakdown of visceral fat creates a cascade of positive adjustments that reach nearly every organ system in the body when supported by healthy habits. When visceral fat begins to decompose, many people report feeling lighter, more energetic, and mentally clearer. Others, however, may feel temporary fatigue, irritability, or digestive changes. These different experiences are often related to how prepared the rest of the body is to handle the shift in energy and hormones. If someone has been very sedentary, eating a highly processed diet, sleeping poorly, and living under chronic stress, the sudden breakdown of large amounts of visceral fat can feel more chaotic. The body has to process a surge of fatty acids, ketones, and metabolic byproducts, which can create transitional discomfort. On the other hand, when visceral fat reduction happens gradually in the context of well-structured habits, the experience tends to be smoother and more positive. Eating a nutrient-dense diet rich in protein, fiber, healthy fats, and micronutrients helps the liver detoxify and process metabolic waste more efficiently. Regular movement, especially walking and strength training, provides muscles with a constant demand for fuel, so the fatty acids released from visceral fat have somewhere productive to go. Hydration and adequate intake of electrolytes support circulation, nerve function, and energy production during this adjustment period. Another factor is the nervous system. As visceral fat decreases, the inflammatory burden on the body declines, which can indirectly influence mood, sleep, and mental clarity. Some people notice fewer headaches, less brain fog, and better emotional stability as their internal environment becomes less inflamed. However, if someone reduces calories too aggressively or uses extreme methods to force fat loss, the body can respond with a stress reaction. This might show up as elevated cortisol, cravings, poor sleep, or even hormonal disruptions in women, such as irregular cycles. That is why balanced strategies and medical supervision are so important, especially for individuals with underlying conditions. To support the breakdown of visceral fat safely, it is essential to focus on sustainable habits rather than quick fixes. A moderate caloric deficit, consistent meal timing that fits your lifestyle, adequate protein to protect muscle mass, and a strong emphasis on whole foods form the foundation. Combining this with resistance training 2 to 4 times per week and daily light movement, like walking, encourages your body to prioritize fat as a fuel source. Mind-body practices, such as deep breathing, meditation, or gentle stretching, can help regulate the stress response, making it less likely that the body will cling to fat as a protective reaction. Finally, everyone's starting point and health status are different. People with diabetes, heart disease, liver problems, kidney issues, or those taking medications that affect blood sugar or blood pressure must be especially careful. What is safe for one person may be risky for another. For this reason, any serious attempt to reduce visceral fat through diet changes, fasting strategies, or intense exercise should be planned together with a licensed medical professional who can monitor lab tests, adjust medications, and personalize the approach. The real goal is not only to decompose visceral fat, but to do it in a way that builds a stronger, healthier, and more resilient body in the long term.